We are Rogue Media Sports.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best nut sound you've ever heard.
With the Wells Fargo Active Cash Credit Card, you can earn unlimited 2% cash rewards on purchases you want and purchases you need. That means you earn 2% cash rewards on what you want, like season tickets to watch your favorite team, and 2% cash rewards on what you need, like paying for parking. That's the beauty of the Active Cash Credit Card. It's ready when you are, with unlimited 2% cash rewards. The Wells Fargo Active Cash Credit Card. That's real life ready. Terms apply. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/activecash.
It is Matt Mosley, and we told you we would be ready to react if there was anything to react to. And as of Friday afternoon, the old Friday afternoon news dump, the Cowboys have done the deed, and it now appears that Scott Linehan is no longer the offensive coordinator. We've talked about this all season. We didn't know if this would be the exact move. As I record this with Ed Werder, who was kind enough to come in off the golf course today. If you're not listening to us in Dallas, it's a fairly nice day, although a little gusty out there. Ed, I could hear the wind in the background. But, one of the things I'll do here, Ed, is read this this is Jason Garrett's statement on this, but I wanted to get your just initial reaction. I mean, obviously this isn't catching us completely off guard. Ed Werder, as only he could yesterday, and of course people, Ed, name names, we want names. Ed had reported, and was the only one to really report this, that the Cowboys had reached out to a prominent offensive coach, mainly an offensive coordinator type, who ended up getting a job elsewhere. And, Ed, you reported this yesterday, which is Thursday. We taped this Friday afternoon just in the aftermath of this news coming down about Scott Linehan out. That lets you know, Ed, that at least the Cowboys were exploring this idea. So, obviously, this news doesn't come as a complete shock to us.
Yeah, the two interesting elements to me in that piece of information that I acquired and put out in public yesterday was, first of all, that Jason Garrett was the one making the call. So that indicated to me that he was safe in all likelihood, barring some unexpected, unforeseen circumstance going forward, that he was going to be the head coach in 2019, and that Scott Linehan's status as the offensive coordinator was clearly in jeopardy if they were reaching out to people who were being pursued for jobs with other teams. Now, this particular person told me that they had just taken another job about 20 minutes before speaking with Garrett, and had all things been equal in terms of the position they were being offered and the pay and so forth, that the preference probably would have been to join the Cowboys. But the Cowboys made the call too late. The person was already committed, felt strongly about not going back on his word as far as having accepted this other position. But I think it made clear that Garrett was going to be the coach going forward, and that Linehan was in serious jeopardy of being replaced as the offensive coordinator, even though at the time, 24 hours ago, this person was not sure whether it was a coordinator's job they were going to offer or it was going to be the quarterback coaching job, which I think now both of those things are probably going to come open, given the fact that Kellen Moore as a quarterback's coach was the handpicked choice of Scott Linehan.
Yeah, I think the same thing. I will say Calvin Watkins of the Athletic has tweeted out this afternoon that he's been told Kellen Moore will be retained as the quarterback's coach. But I'm with you. It seems highly unlikely, since that was now I am, and of course Stretch would be able to, I think, confirm this. I have been told, Ed, that if they went back to Wade Wilson and said, Wade, please come back as quarterback's coach, I think Wade was the way that whole thing went down, I think Wade would tell them where to go. I
think Wade's happy with his life after coaching, and it would take a really unique opportunity, probably somewhere else other than Dallas, for him to get back involved in the profession again. But I do want you to fulfill your promise and read that statement from the Cowboys, because I want people to see the value in what we and other people who cover teams bring. Because what you're going to get is one presentation of the facts as the franchise sees it, and then you're going to get the real inside story from you and I and other people who cover the team. I want people to be able to distinguish how starkly different these two truths will be.
You use these two truths pretty loosely here. This is the statement on Scott Linehan's departure from Jason Garrett. This was not an easy decision because of how highly we regard Scott Linehan as a football coach and as a person. He and I had some really positive, substantive, and open discussions which took place in the latter part of this week, and we ultimately agreed that it would be in the best interest of all the parties involved if we were to make a change at this position. This was very much a mutual decision, and there was a great deal of common ground and shared understanding between both of us during our meetings. Scott has had an incredibly positive impact on our football team. He has been instrumental in the development and success of a significant number of our veteran and younger players. He is an outstanding football coach, a great friend, and we wish him and his family nothing but the absolute best moving forward. And that
I only laughed a few times while you read that.
Yeah, it's these things are rarely mutual. I have a hard time seeing Scott Linehan in these meetings saying, Jason, if it's better for you, let's just kind of part ways here. I don't think that's the way the thing came down at all. But this is Jason Garrett trying to sugarcoat things.
I think in the days after the Cowboys season ended with that loss to the Rams, which quite honestly was more the result of defensive failure than it was offensive failure. But I think in those past 3 or 4 days, what's been happening, other than the Cowboys making fools of themselves from the standpoint of Jason Garrett, twice on Monday, basically saying that he did not anticipate any significant changes to his coaching staff, and apparently doing so before he had any conversations of consequence with Jerry or Stephen Jones, because Jerry Jones, within 24 hours, completely contradicted the coach and made it clear that he was keeping an open mind about potential other coaches on the offensive side of the ball, especially a play caller who might become available in the next week or so, which does two things. It creates the question of, is there somebody on one of these 4 remaining teams in the NFC and AFC championship games that Jerry is mindful of and potentially targeting should they have an interest to become available? And 2, he's leaving himself open to being solicited at the swap meet known as the Senior Bowl for potential replacements for Scott Linehan. And this is while Scott Linehan was still under contract to the Cowboys. So I think what you had going on was Jason Garrett obviously reaching out to other potential candidates to gauge their interest in coming to Dallas. And at the same time, Linehan was privately and quietly making calls around the league to see if he could get a job with one of these, other coaches who was going elsewhere to become a first-time head coach, or what are there 8? There were 8 job openings for NFL head coaches in the NFL. He was trying to get one of those positions. Obviously failed to do so, and so now Scott Linehan is out of the Cowboys organization and without a job in the NFL. And I did reach out to him and ask him if he wanted to offer any insight or to sort of defend himself in what's happened here. And at this point, he's chosen not to do that right now. He said he wanted to take some time and reflect before he was public with any thoughts and comments about what's happened here.
Well, I appreciate that, Ed, and I would assume when he's ready, the Doomsday podcast would be the forum where he would want to weigh in. I mean, I just have to assume that. So we'll certainly give Scott that opportunity at some point. Now, Ed, quickly, everything turns now to, okay, what are they going to do and how are they going to replace? Because a lot of these coaches, and as you said, and boy, you sent everybody scrambling to think of names and who the Cowboys may have just barely missed with your report yesterday, and you were not at liberty to provide a name. Now we got to wonder, okay, who's out there? There are still 4 teams left. Could anybody from one of those teams be in play here? Or could the Cowboys hire a member or promote somebody from within the staff? Ed, the speculation on Twitter began just immediately, and that was the tight ends coach, Doug Nussmeier. You remember he spent some time with Nick Saban on his staff at Alabama. I think he's been at Florida. Some of these SEC fans are not, maybe some of the same people that have been upset with Linehan are not really excited about the prospect of Nussmeier as a possible candidate. There's also the possibility that Jason could try to convince Jerry, why don't you let me go back to calling plays the way you had it in the beginning, and let's see how that goes. What is your gut telling you the Cowboys will do here?
Well, I think that the possibility of Jason calling the plays, again, is real. I think there's a possibility if they can't get the right person to replace Scott Linehan on a full-time basis, then this becoming more of a collaborative effort is entirely possible. In fact, there was, I think, a sense internally that it had evolved into that toward the end of the season anyway, even though Scott Linehan would insist that nothing was different. I heard from people in the organization that Garrett did become more involved, Nussmeier became more involved, and even Dak Prescott became more involved in the game plans from the Giants game forward. And so I think one person who comes to mind as a potential target for the Cowboys, who fits the description of what I said earlier on the staff of one of these 4 teams in the championship round, would be Dan Campbell, an offensive assistant under Sean Payton with the New Orleans Saints, former Cowboys tight end and interim head coach of the Dolphins a couple of years ago, a big, strong, personality, an imposing physical figure, and a guy who has gotten interviews for head coaching jobs around the league, although he has not yet landed a full-time opportunity. But I think he's one of the possibilities. It's interesting that a lot of people are looking for the next Sean McVay and taking people off his staff. Even Zach Taylor, his quarterbacks coach, apparently is going to get a head coaching job, and yet it seems nobody is interested in Sean Payton's staff of assistants, as prolific as that offense has been. It's a little bit surprising. And I guess owed mainly to the fact that everybody believes that it's all Sean and Drew Brees. So
yeah,
I think that's one point I'd like to make. And then sort of to just get back to what we were talking about before you read the Cowboys statement, is to get into some of the palace intrigue about all of this and how these things happen, and how, I don't know if you would say the Cowboys organization is dysfunctional. I mean, Troy Aikman accused them of being that, so I guess that's a fair description. But it was really a fractious relationship between Jason Garrett and Scott Linehan. And that, combined with an offense that failed in the red zone and didn't maximize Dak Prescott's skill set, I think likely led to this move today. And I think it's interesting that there's a lack of trust between Garrett and Linehan, given that Linehan gave Garrett his first NFL head coaching job with the Dolphins, and then Garrett hired Linehan as his play caller when Jerry Jones forbid him to continue in that role. And I think you kind of hinted at this, that, at the end of last offseason, Garrett wanted to replace Linehan. And not only did Jerry decline that, but instead he decided that the organization would give Linehan everything he wanted, even things to the detriment of Garrett. And, so Linehan now is sometimes not known for respecting Garrett's position of superiority because of the way they started their working relationship, where, Linehan was Garrett's boss. Now Garrett technically is supposed to be Linehan's boss. And so the change in their roles created some uncomfortableness or some friction. And then the fact that, Jerry basically empowered Linehan to the point that he fired several Garrett assistants. You mentioned Wade Wilson, Frank Pollock was another one, and then replaced him with his own choices. Just very unusual that you would have that kind of situation exist on a coaching staff where the two principals involved have such a long history together and have done so many good things to benefit one another that ultimately they were sort of at odds over the play calling and the direction of the offense and who the assistant should be.
At one point this season, Ed, and you remember us talking about it, both these coaches were on their way to being out. And the turnaround of the Cowboys season from 3-5 to what it became, it allowed Garrett to be on the precipice or on the cusp of a possible extension. But we never saw enough from the offense, although the Amari Cooper integrating him. And I'll point to one area you and I talked a lot about heading into the season. Now, I think I was a little more, what should I say, I don't know, sometimes maybe shrill, sometimes maybe overreact, but I thought it was ridiculous, and I think you did to a certain extent too, but you were willing at least to hear Linehan out, and he spent a lot of time with us when we were out at training camp talking about what they would do with not a true number one wide receiver, but how it would give them the opportunity to be more interchangeable with their wide receivers, and we watched them go into a season with Cole Beasley, Hearns, rookie Michael Gallup, somebody named Deontay Thompson, Noah Brown, I guess, was in the mix. And quite honestly, Ed, it turned into a joke. And so they ended up, the reason it worked, obviously, the Amari Cooper thing, and that was a great thing, but the reason they had to go give up that first-round pick, Scott Linehan was part of that decision. And so I think that's another part of why this thing, ended up this way.
Well, I think until they made the Amari Cooper trade, and that's trading an asset, for the 2019 season and beyond, for something to benefit you in 2018, and they certainly did benefit. But I think the coaches, even then, in all likelihood, felt like they were being set up to fail by the front office with the decision that they made. Not to go pursue a significant replacement for Dez Bryant or Jason Witten, the tight end who retired, to have nobody really in place to take either one of those roles was a huge miscalculation that did a lot of harm to the franchise and especially the early part of the season. And the fact that they were able to recover and win the division, and obviously there was a coaching change in the middle of the season too, right? Paul Alexander, who had been brought in to replace Frank Pollock as the offensive line coach, was fired in the middle of the season. An unheard of historic decision by the Cowboys in the middle of the season to fire an assistant coach, promoted Mark Colombo, brought in Hudson Houck as a consultant, and those two moves obviously allowed them then to regain their balance and go win the division and even win a playoff game. But, I just think now the issue is, can Jason Garrett, even if they make another hire, is he going to be open-minded enough to allow this person to make the changes that are necessary to fully take advantage of the athleticism that they have at the quarterback position? I think there's been too much of an effort to force Dak Prescott into being a drop-back passer that he's not, and not often enough have they taken full advantage of his unique elements in his skill set, which are his mobility and ability to make plays on the run. And here's where I think they are. For the first time since the merger, the four highest scoring teams in the NFL have reached the conference championship games. And the two NFC teams behind the Chiefs, who are at 35.3 points a game and the highest scoring team in football, and the third highest scoring in the history of football, are the Rams and the Saints in the NFC championship game. The Rams average 32.9 points a game. The Saints average 31.5 points a game. The Cowboys average 21 points a game. How are they going to score 10 more points per game to be able to compete with these teams? Can they really do it with Jason Garrett deciding the direction of the offense, even if somebody else is calling the plays, somebody they bring in from outside the organization, or are his conservative tendencies going to overshadow whatever it is that person wants to do?
Yeah, I think those are great points, and you're right. He still presides over this thing, and what can he do? Just to reiterate something Ed said that'll be of major interest to everybody else. We know Jerry has a huge admiration for Sean Payton and that Saints staff. Dan Campbell played for the Cowboys, and so has some pedigree there, and that would be very interesting, and has been an interim head coach before. Ed, remind me, did Pete Carmichael get some looks? Has he? I feel like his name came up. The Saints offensive coordinator at one point in with some of these openings. What is his situation with the Saints?
Well, he is very much trusted by Drew Brees and by Sean Payton. He sort of operates in a position between the two of them. There have been times when Sean had to. He was obviously sent off the field in a one-year suspension at one point, and it was Pete Carmichael who came in and was then the play caller for the Saints. And he, in the past, has gotten an interview here and there for head coaching opportunities, but there have just been 8 jobs available, and so far, to the best of my knowledge, he has not been somebody who's been solicited for an interview for a head coaching position. So. Maybe he's, not as highly regarded as he should be.
Yeah.
But I don't see him being the guy that the Cowboys would be after on that Saints staff. I think Campbell makes a lot more sense. He played under Bill Parcells, so he has a little bit of that kind of personality and toughness and edge to him. He's obviously a tight end, a physically imposing guy. But again, is he going to get along with Garrett? Is Garrett going to trust him? Is Jerry going to force him on Garrett? Is he going to completely change the Cowboys from a conservative offensive organization to a freewheeling, throw the football around the field kind of team that seems like are the ones that have the most success in the NFL and the direction the league seems to be going right now?
Yeah, that's hard. That would be hard to imagine him coming in and kind of imposing his, and again, as long as Garrett's here, it's still going to be sort of the DNA of what he wants to do in his offense. So it'll be, but right now, today, the story is, I think the fans have been so frustrated. It was like they needed someone thrown overboard, and Scott Linehan, they knew it wasn't going to be Garrett, or it was like a 95% chance it wasn't going to be Garrett. And so in a sense, you're right. We're talking about who they're going to replace. Today, I think there is somewhat, it's kind of sad to say, but there's joy in Cowboys land at just some form of change. They were just desperate for anybody to admit we need to do something different. And
right.
in firing Linehan, at least that statement has been made.
Well, and my opinion, and certainly it seems to be Jerry Jones's opinion, is that Dak Prescott can make this a championship contending team if Jerry creates the right system or the right environment for him. The system now just doesn't exploit his, skill set, and in fact might emphasize his weaknesses more often than not. I mean, he's not Aikman, he's not Romo. He wins because of the belief he inspires in the locker room and because he's a great threat as a runner. And I just don't see how one week he's running for touchdowns and cartwheeling toward the goal line in the playoffs, and the next game, he doesn't run for the first time until it's the fourth quarter and it no longer matters. And then, you look at one of the most important downs they had all season was a one possession situation in the fourth quarter, fourth down, game on the line, and Garrett and Linehan just show no imagination with the play call. They, condensed the formation and hand it to Ezekiel Elliott with the expectation that, their backup center, Joe Looney, is going to win against Ndamukong Suh at the point of attack. And the play fails, obviously, and the Cowboys turn the ball over at the Rams 35 in a one-possession game. So beyond Dak running, just 3 times for 2 yards and none of those until the fourth quarter, and then, Zeke Elliott only getting, 2 opportunities in the passing game in a year where he led the Cowboys in rushing and receiving. To me, that's sinful and not giving your team the best chance to win.
Well, Ed, we appreciate it. You came in off the golf course to do this emergency podcast, and were able to get a hold of Scott Linehan as only you can, and be in touch with all of your sources. Appreciate everything you bring to the Doomsday podcast, and we knew there was a chance we would be gathering pretty quickly again, and it did happen. Scott Linehan out as Cowboys offensive coordinator, and the Doomsday podcast will continue to monitor everything as we look to see who that replacement will be. Ed, really appreciate it.
Good stuff, Matthew.
All right, there he goes. Ed Werder, of Hall of Fame status joining the Doomsday podcast. And, as we talk about Linehan's departure for the Cowboys, boy, I still want to point you and appreciate they've been with us all year. It is my bookie. They pay. They do an incredible job, and that's why I recommend them to you. They get it back to you quickly, in-game, live betting, the most rewarding player perks in the business. And for you fantasy guys out there, you can even bet the over-under on how many fantasy points a player will score each game. Remember this, join now, and MyBookie will match your deposit dollar for dollar. Use the promo code DOOMSDAY, DOOMSDAY, to activate the offer. Visit MyBookie online today. That's MyBookie. And don't forget to use the promo code DOOMSDAY when creating your account to claim up to $1,000 in free play. You play, you win, you get paid. Well, there is someone who will have more time to play fantasy and perhaps kind of throw down some bets there at MyBookie, and it is Scott Linehan. And as we're joined now by Glenn Stretch Smith, former Cowboys coach and scout, he's usually on here giving his grades. Stretch, I need to credit you because you were you sort of had a feeling all along that there was somewhat of a fracture in the Garrett-Linehan relationship, and not so much, like a friendship. It just, they weren't really on the same page, and you really felt this thing was coming. And I think the only thing that was holding you up was, okay, what are they going to do? How would they replace it? Would Jason call plays? Now that it's happened, what is your reaction, and what do you see the Cowboys doing from here?
Yeah, I do think that it is a tricky situation because, again, you think about really the two types of offenses that are in the NFL, and those are the guys, the West Coast guys, who number the protections and name the routes, or the Don Coryell, Ernie Zampese, Norv Turner tree, which that verbiage is naming the protections and numbering the routes. So it is starting to be kind of and I don't want to say a thing of the past because that's not it. It's a verbiage that not many people are still using. Route concepts are still the same in both offenses, but it's the verbiage. And so when you're trying to keep a head coach who's comfortable and understanding that verbiage, that's the offense that he's been in. And I think, you see Norv Turner, obviously his son Scott at Carolina, they still call it this way. I'm not sure who else in the NFL still uses, again, digitizes the routes. And so I believe that it's a small, shallow pool of candidates that you'd be, fishing in to try to say, okay, well, who's going to replace Scott Linehan, and who's Jason comfortable replacing Scott Linehan with? And I think ultimately that's nobody. I think it's going to be Jason that, will take over this play calling. Now, if he can find somebody, again, that he's comfortable with and that understands and can call this, I think maybe that would be a possibility. But as we sit here today, I just don't think that's I'm not sure what candidates you'd point to say, boy, that's a live candidate to come back here and be the offensive coordinator for the Cowboys.
You've graded this thing and looked at the film all season. We've talked about Dak. You're not one of those that, hey, run Dak more, you got to run him more. That's not really what you've been about. But when we look back and wonder, okay, why did Scott Linehan, why was it time, why had this sort of run its course, is the biggest reason, like in my mind, it's, you look at who's coaching this weekend with Andy Reid and John McVay and Peyton and some of these dynamic offenses, and it's, the Cowboys offense, no matter how good Zeke is, it just doesn't always compare, or really at all, to some of these other offenses. And that's a reason you would want to make a change. What do you think is the biggest reason they had to go ahead and make a change here?
Well, and again, I'm not in the meetings. I don't go out, I don't go out to the Star and kind of get involved in all that. But as a guy that looks at it from afar, that tries to develop, a really good opinion of what's going on, I kind of try to let my eyes decide what's going on instead of listening to what's going on in the building. And I I really believe that it goes back a ways, guys. And I'm going to go back to last year, which was, he didn't want to keep Wade Wilson here, who's a very experienced quarterback coach. He didn't want to keep Frank Pollock, who's a really good offensive line coach. He didn't want to keep Dez. He wanted to bring in Austin. He wanted to kind of formulate his own receivers because he thought he could run some of these deeper, and then that's how you attack a single high safety. And we don't need to get into the real football verbiage of it, but, being able to run deeper crossing routes. And that's what you see some of that dynamic offenses do. However, you see them also running 7- and 8-man protections. Anyway, I'm saying all that to say, I think it's more than just him calling the offense for the reason, guys, that he's not here right now. I think it goes around some personnel decisions. I think it goes around some coaching decisions. And I think ultimately it came back to really not fit good for him with what he was doing offensively. And that's the same reason, if you go back to when he was the head coach of the Rams, it's almost the same blueprint. I mean, he wanted personnel changes. He wanted some things done, and eventually the Rams fell off. And I think that's the reason for the falling off of the Cowboys offense. It's not just the play calling. There's some things that I think that center around that.
Yeah, and lastly, you think that there's a good chance Garrett will call the plays. Obviously, Jerry will have his say on what that will happen. Ed threw out the name Dan Campbell, former Cowboys tight end, who is now the tight ends coach / assistant head coach with the New Orleans Saints. And he has been an interim head coach in the league and a guy that some people look at as a future head coach. Could that be a possibility? Is there anybody else we're not thinking about, Stretch, that, of the guys on staff, Nussmeier's name has been mentioned because he's, been a play caller on the college level in the past. Where do you think this thing goes?
Well, I mean, I think if you're just going to start, putting, I do think Campbell could. I mean, that's as good a guess as any. I mean, Ron Turner, North's brother, I think would be as good a guess as any. He's been a coordinator in the league. I just don't think that. I don't think that that's the direction that it's going. And again, we could call yourbookie.com or whoever that is, I guess, and place a bet on it. But I don't think that's where it's going, guys. I really don't. I think that Jason. I think the interesting thing we need to watch is Jason going to get a contract extension? Because I don't think if he doesn't get a contract extension, I think he's just going to pull the reins on this thing and do it himself. If he gets a contract extension, then I think you start thinking about, hey, what's the direction, or who could they bring in here? And even if they bring in somebody in here with the offensive coordinator title, are they going to have the play calling responsibilities? I think those are things that we'll have to see as it unfolds.
A very subtle point by Stretch, but so well taken that a lot of people aren't talking about that verbiage between the different kinds of offenses. That in a sense, this verbiage is not all over the NFL, and it reduces that pool. I think that's a very, very interesting point. I did see, by the way, Zampese, where a lot of this stuff comes from with the Cowboys. Ernie Zampese, years and years ago, I think his son was recently fired, so he's out there. I saw where that happened, but that's a very, very interesting point. Stretch, appreciate you being a part of this emergency podcast. We pulled Ed off the golf course. I know you were doing some important things this afternoon. I've heard from Galloway today. Galloway's been staying up late watching car auctions. He said he was up till 3 this morning watching.
He's trying to bid on one of those Dodge Power Wagons at the Barrett Jackson. I don't know. I talked to him too. He said he slept in till 10:30.
Yeah.
He's kind of on the Mosley schedule. I like it. That's the way you do things too, Mosley. You sleep around till about noon. That's good for you.
You have me all wrong. It is Glenn Stretch Smith checking in from out there, somewhere in Parker County. Stretch, we appreciate you.
Appreciate it, guys. Have a good day.
There he goes. That's a special That's a Stretch segment. I want to thank Frito Nation Productions for, jumbling up his schedule and being ready, and kind of some of the women of the Chamber of Commerce up here. Frito is at Allen. We appreciate them changing their schedule to make room for us this afternoon, and they do a great job. Ed Werder, Glenn Stretch Smith, MyBookie, and all the great sponsors, of course, Hodges Capital. They do such an amazing job as partners with us, and continue to look at them for all your financial needs and your investment needs, because those guys do a lot more than some of the others, and they get you right, and they've certainly done that for me and our family. All right, it is the Doomsday Podcast Emergency. Good night, everybody.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.